I thought Elroy was a really enjoyable late addition character to Community, so let's take a look at his character and see what he's all about, what makes him enjoyable. Elroy was a character who was added as essentially a main character in the sixth and final season, despite not technically being credited as a main character. He appears in almost every episode, all but one. He does not appear in the season premiere, but he's introduced in the second episode of the season. He has this role as a guy who is this kind of tech dude who created this virtual reality thing that the dean gets stuck in. He has to go and help get Dean out. Immediately he's a character I think, audience can find enjoyable and funny. And at the end of the episode, after helping Dean out, he ends up enrolling in Greendale, quickly ends up joining the Greendale committee, and he fits in really well. Now, Elroy was basically created as a replacement character for Buzz Hickey, played by Jonathan Banks. Jonathan Banks had left the show to do Better Call Saul. Buzz Hickey himself was a replacement character for Chevy Chase's Pierce Hawthorne. I think that Elroy kind of fills an important role. Well, a couple important roles. One is being a character who is, like a senior, an older guy, which I think isn't important because having characters, from who are kind of like all different ages and races and genders and backgrounds, religion, political views, does create, I think, a lot of interesting, humor and conflict and, dynamics throughout the show. Yeah, I think he also acts as a replacement for Shirley and Troy to an extent, taking on this role as a black character who is, involved in a lot of race-related jokes throughout the series, many of which are very funny. I like the one in the wedding episode where he's basically goes around talking up white people. But yeah, Elroy is able to, I think, assimilate in with the rest of the cast pretty easily. It seems to come pretty naturally to him. I think the actor Keith David, who had previously appeared in an episode of Community, the narrator of the big Pillow Fort episode, Dan Harmon must have liked him with that. And he's like, let's bring him on as a full-time character here. He actually fits in kind of more naturally than Buzz Hickey, who was a character I liked a lot. I thought Jonathan Banks played him well, but I feel like he kind of just fits in, naturally. I think he works sometimes well as kind of a straight man at times, but someone who can also be very wacky. Keith David is a good actor, and I think he brings a lot of just life and energy and charisma to the role and to the character. In the seventh episode of the season, we get a story that focuses on him. We're all about kind of this backstory thing where he was in this relationship previously with a woman who's a singer, a woman named Julie, who ends up having to meet again. And we learn about how, he was in love with her, she ended up breaking his heart, and how it messed him up. And because of that, he had trouble making a connection with people, which is an explanation for why he, was kind of avoiding getting attached to, all the characters here on the show, particularly Jeff. But, after confronting her and dealing with it, he was able to kind of move past. And this kind of explains his, like I said, his general kind of aloof and distant attitude for a lot of it. And I think after this, he is able to grow kind of a bit of a stronger connection with the rest of the characters, open himself up to them better and just, generally become friends with them. Not just a guy who's going to class with them and, being part of their Save Greendale committee, but just actually forming a relationship, a friend with them. He is largely kind of left out of the finale. I'm not totally sure what that is, although it is apparently still up in the air, and there's a possibility that he may be appearing in the Community movie on Peacock whenever that comes out. So that's something to potentially look forward to with his character.